Hello, everyone. As you're getting your audio set up, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give a few moments here. We received instructions that it's taking people a few minutes past the top of the hour to just get the right link and get where they want to be. So bear with us as we just continue to admit people. And thank you so much for selecting our session. We hope to share for about 30 minutes or so, but then we want to leave ample time at the end for dialogue and conversation and questions. So we'll try to have about 15 minutes available at the end to have a conversation with everyone. We always want to know if these things that we share are useful or could be tweaked or could be localized, or you had an amazing idea you want to share with everyone. Perfect. Hannah, we got one more there in the waiting room. Oh, two more in the waiting room.
I've let Andrea in a couple times, so I think they might be experiencing tech trouble.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I saw that name a few times come up. And thanks everyone for your patience. Just to repeat for you, we were advised that it's just prudent to give a few extra minutes at the top of the hour here to let people have the right link available and get into the right space they wanted. So we just don't want to preemptively start, but we also want to be respectful of your time and also get going here in about a moment or two. And again, thanks for selecting the session and being curious about youth engagement in the work that we're all doing on SDGs. We will share a presentation for about half hour or so, share our stories and our thoughts and our insights. And then we do want to leave about 15 minutes at the end for dialogue and conversation.
Okay, Rachel, I think we're good to go now.
Perfect. Yeah, I was going to say I've got 12:03 and the waiting room isn't flashing anymore. So Hannah, over to you to start us off.
Hi, everybody. So Rachel and I are from Children First Canada. We're a national organization that advocates for the rights and well-being of children. And today we're going to be presenting on youth engagement and advancing the SDGs. I was just wondering if I could get a show of hands of who here is involved with youth engagement or has youth engagement efforts at their organization. Okay, so quite a few of you. So we're just going to go over like the main principles today, and hopefully you learn something new, and we can definitely discuss more as we go through our presentation. So first, I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. I personally lived on the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenni Lepe, and the allied nations that share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I also want to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, which is the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi and Huron-Wendat peoples. And I also want to share a picture of the new Ojibwe Urban National Park that's actually being co-managed by Indigenous people. And I think this is a really positive step towards reconciliation in my community. I'll pass it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Hannah. And the picture you see on the right is the cliffs of Prince Edward Island, also known as the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people that have never signed over ownership or given away the cultural space of the land that is here. We celebrate their culture that has been shared on these lands for tens of thousands of years. And in the current context, we do have a very active effort, both at the provincial and the federal level, to advance efforts of reconciliation. Most notably in the last year, you may have been very well aware of the creation of the Day of Recognition at the end of September, the call to action to recognize the truth and reconciliation efforts. And that was brought forward by Senator Brian Francis from Prince Edward Island and former chief of the Mi'kmaq Confederacy. So we also are committed to ensuring that our efforts of reconciliation are active and current. So a little bit more about who Children First Canada is. As Hannah mentioned off the top, we are a national charitable organization. We take the perspective that there are 8 million children and youth in this country who are citizens without a great deal of voice and representation at many times, despite the ratification of things like the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and our own human rights treaties. So we look to collaborate with many organizations and individuals and experts across all of Canada. And most importantly, we actively engage with children and youth to amplify their voice and bring them into the rooms of power, whether that's through health systems, research that is ongoing, government initiatives, corporate leaders, bringing these decision makers together with the subject matter experts themselves, children and youth, is definitely at the core of all of our activities. So we're bold, we're ambitious, we're a ragtag sort of remote virtual team that works coast to coast to coast across Canada. And we really are committed to ensuring that this is one of the best countries in the world for kids to grow up. So a little bit about ourselves. I'm Rachel Gilmore, and I am the communications specialist for Children's First Canada. So I touch on a lot of our public-facing collateral, as well as our government relations, our media work, a lot of our policy briefings, and I support our research endeavors as well. I am also a PhD researcher myself through the University of Toronto, and I am actually exploring exactly what we're sharing with you today, which is this concept that adults can absolutely learn from children and youth when they're the subject matter experts. So what does that look like to have a successful engagement where the child is actually the teacher? Which is a fascinating area of work. As adults, we have to sometimes park our expectations of power and have a bit of humility. So that's a little bit about me. I've spent 25 years in this sector in child, youth, and family advocacy in government, executive, and consultancy fashions. So with that, over to my colleague, Hannah.
Hi, everybody. My name's Hannah. I'm working as a youth engagement coordinator for Children First Canada. And essentially, in my role, I design and deliver the programs that engage our youth that I'll touch on a little bit later. So I work with the Youth Advisory Council and also our Young Canadians Parliament program, along with anything else that might come up, like consultations with ministers, which are very exciting because we're really offering youth the power to share their voices there. And I guess a little fun fact about me is that I'm actually alumni of Children First Canada's programming. I got involved about 7 years ago when Children First Canada was first starting. And so definitely happy to be back here and supporting an organization that helped me grow so much as a leader.
Thanks, Hannah. So we thought it was quite timely to actually share with you all at this conference focused on how we're all working towards advancing our efforts on the SDGs, to share our most recent successful engagement for youth to actually be heard about what they think Canada is doing and should be doing. So this screenshot here, you can see there's a number of youth on the call, and the second from the right bottom is actually Minister Gould. So this is a consultation that just happened last week. The week before, Hannah, they're blurring together. Last week. And part of this was many of you would have seen the public call out for consultations and input into Minister Gould's efforts to take forward Canada's presentation in New York to the United Nations later this summer, actually quite soon, and it's happening in July. And youth were identified as key stakeholders to be able to engage and give their feedback. So, internally as an organization, we looked at, how could we best facilitate that? And we did sort of a few expected things. We shared it on our social media channels, which youth follow themselves. We shared it in our e-newsletter, which goes out to a great deal of educators and other social service providers in the child and youth sector across the country. But we thought, could we do a little more and have an opportunity for the minister to hear directly from youth on what we, simply say is the good, the bad, and the ugly. What is Canada doing that the youth see in their own communities or see federally or see at the provincial or territorial level? What do they hear from their peers across the country in different sections of community life? And where do they think we're falling short? What are the SDGs that we need more effort on? So with that, I think on our next slide, we heard a lot of amazing things in this consultation. And Josephine made a comment to the minister, and she said, one of the good things that we're doing, one of the good things for some youth that came out of the pandemic was that education became a bit more accessible. That there's alternative things to just sitting with a textbook. A lot of organizations or community service clubs had to adapt and pivot. So things like you're going to hear from Hannah about the Young Canadians Parliament, the YCP, it's more than just about books to read, but she did end and say, but there's still work to be done. We've all probably heard a lot about the impacts of online learning and virtual learning and the pros and the cons. There's a lot of cons to it. As much as accessibility can drive it, it's not always the chosen path that youth want to engage in. We also heard from Emery, who has been doing some amazing work out in Manitoba, starting a petition and working hard to change the wage gender gap. And so her reflection was to say, I'm actually seeing the political processes in Canada move. When I look at the SDGs and think about issues around justice, there's a lot of injustice that is significantly going down. This is a good change. She even reflected to the minister, my campaign may not even be needed anymore. So what an amazing thing to hear from a young advocate working on her own SDG initiative to be able to say, hey, I think we're making some progress here. We heard a lot about the economy. And this is a new trend, Hannah and I can both attest to, and those of you that raised your hand that are working in youth engagement, we are curious if you're hearing it too, but there is a absolute newly heightened focus on the economy and the affordability of life and things like food insecurity and access to basic needs, which youth are getting very vocal about because they're seeing it and they're experiencing it. This quote from Sheila, who is just about to turn 18 in the Ottawa area, she says, affordability is a devastating issue. I attended Catholic school, which is full of new immigrants. They cannot afford school supplies. There's no Wi-Fi at home. They cannot afford lunch. It is heartbreaking. They are failing because they cannot afford things. So when we look at our efforts on the SDGs and we think about access and education and affordability and good economic opportunities, we know these issues are all intersecting, and they're intersecting for youth, and they see it and they're identifying it for us. And one of the most predominant issues we have continued to hear pre-pandemic, through the pandemic, and now after the pandemic are issues connected to mental health. So Jaden, who, this young fellow, he is going to be a prime minister one day. Jaden is so astute in his understanding of the political processes, and he shared with the minister, even though there's been progress made in the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen the flaws in the system. And to know the jurisdictional tug of war to say, we know it's a provincial issue, but the federal government has a duty of quality and access to address. Mental health issues at home also ties into the need to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code, which, if you're not familiar, that is the provision that still allows corporal punishment of children between the ages of 2 and 12 by a adult in authority, teacher, or parent. So the intersectionality of these issues is very well known by youth. For those of you that didn't raise your hand yet on youth engagement as part of your work to advance the SDGs, these type of quotes we wanted to share with you today because it is so evident of the level of expertise and insight that youth can bring forward. So if you have a particular SDG theme or area that you are trying to address and you want to be inclusive of all voices in your community, this is proof that youth absolutely can speak knowledgeably to these issues and have a great deal to contribute.
Thanks, Rachel. Next, I just wanted to highlight where we get youth to participate in our programs, because as we know, if you work in youth engagement, it can be difficult to find youth that want to engage in your programs, and there's multiple barriers to participation. So we have two main programs that we run. Young Canadians Parliament. Last year, we had about 200 youth participate in that, and 15 youth volunteer as facilitators to help some of those youth focus on ideas they want to address. And we also run a youth advisory council, which is composed, well, right now there's only 5, but we just closed applications, and we had about 56 youth from across the country apply, which is really great. So for the Young Canadians Parliament, it's a 6-month program, and youth learn about the processes of government, and then they learn how they can take action in their communities on issues they care about. So we divide them up into themes, which they self-select. And those themes kind of focus on the top 10 threats to children, which is a research report we run every year. So youth can gather up in groups on mental health, mitigating child abuse, addressing poverty, climate change. So there's really a wide range of selections that fall within the SDGs as well. And throughout the program, youth really gain the skills to become strong advocates in their communities. And many of them actually end up taking action in their communities. So of our last cohort, we had Emery, who was featured on the last slide, and she's running her own campaign to, well, she's working with, I think, 3 other young women in Manitoba to put a petition forward, and they're working with MLAs to end the gender wage gap. And then we have another couple of youth that are taking action on mitigating child abuse. And they're working on their own campaign and working with members of parliament to try to create more education opportunities for for parents and other adults that work with children on how to mitigate child abuse. And then we have another group that is very involved with repealing Section 43. And honestly, this was a self-identified issue by them. And we've had them meet with Senator Kushner, who is leading the current repeal on Section 43 of the Criminal Code. And 2 of those youth are actually going to present at a committee in the Senate about repealing Section 43 of the Criminal Code. And so it's really awesome that their voices are being heard in these decision-making settings like the Senate, where their voices wouldn't traditionally be included because they're under the age of 18 and can't vote. So you're probably wondering how we get youth to participate in a virtual program. And I'm going to be frank, it's not necessarily easy to find youth that want to opt in to sit on a Saturday afternoon to participate and talk about politics. It really does take a lot of work to make that happen. So we work with organizations across the country to try and reach youth. So we speak to educators, we speak to child serving organization, grassroots leaders. So I'm not sure if any of you have heard of Future Majority or Vote 16. Those are grassroots efforts to get more youth involved in politics. And we reach a lot of youth through those programs as well. And that's how we get them involved. And through the Young Canadians Parliament, we introduce them to other opportunities and ways they can continue their advocacy afterwards. So a perfect example is our engagement with the SDGs. Another example is we recently ran school food consultations where youth can share their ideas on how to create a national school food program in Canada. I just next want to move over to the principles of youth engagement and how you can be, I guess, a good youth engagement coordinator or a positive adult ally. So the first I'd say is authentic relationships. It's important that you're being authentic yourself and acknowledging the roadblocks and challenges and being true to yourself when you're working with youth. Now, when I say this, I don't mean like tell them all about what you were doing on the weekend, like R-rated stories, but still be appropriate. But really ask them how their days are going. And if there's any big events coming up like prom, like ask them, oh, like what are you doing to prepare? And that can really go a long way and build positive relationships. The next is co-development. Youth want to be included in developing programs, and they can feel a lot of ownership when they do that. So whenever we design a new program or alter programs at CFC, we always include youth in every step of the conversation. So right now I'm working on launching a new program for the fall, and I've had a bunch of our alumni who've gone through our program helping me and providing their feedback on what they think should be included. Next is commitment. You need to outline the commitment up front and be honest about it. And I strongly recommend that when you outline these commitments, you offer varying forms of engagement. There might be a youth that's not available every Saturday for an hour, but they do want to pop in once in a while and share their feedback. So it might be better if you scheduled a quick 15-minute check-in or sent them an email, say like, hey, do you have any feedback for this? And always give like a clear indication of how much time they have. And I usually recommend over a week because unlike adults, youth are not sitting by their email inbox all day. You might be able to find them on social media or through text or phone, other sorts of communication. But as adults, we usually use email and they're not checking that all the time. So it's really important that you're meeting them where they're at and being explicit about the commitments and giving them enough time to do that because they're very busy. Next is to make sure your work is accessible. And when I say accessible, I also mean writing in child-friendly language as well. Sometimes I even catch myself using words. I'm like, hold on a second. If I was 12 years old, would I understand this word? And most of the time the answer is no, and just framing it in a simple way that young people can understand. And when I say this, I don't mean infantizing them, just writing clearly and keeping your sentences short and to the point. You don't need to include all the fluff as you would sometimes to other adults. And for communications, that kind of goes hand in hand for our communications piece. We try to reach youth on social media as well and through partner organizations because that's the easiest way to reach them. Diversity and inclusion is very important. It's also important in like the youth leaders you have present. So we make a very deliberate effort to make sure we have youth volunteers that represent all communities, and we're doing direct outreach to communities that would be traditionally underrepresented in our programs, and when possible, involving them in co-creation as well to make sure our programs reflect their needs. Ongoing learning. As an adult, I recognize that I need to continue to learn and grow, and I can learn a lot from young people and how I can improve. And you know what? They teach me something new every day. Like I think last week, this is kind of outside my work with Children First Canada, but I let my Girl Guides run their meeting, and the two of them were 11 years old, and they did a whole lesson on how bees actually get dehydrated. So I learned something very valuable and new, and we made little bee baths so the bees could get hydrated. And research and evaluation, you need to constantly be checking in on your programs and making sure they're progressing and hearing from youth directly on what they want to be improved. And finally, safe spaces and making sure your spaces are inclusive and welcoming to everyone. Oh, it wasn't my final point. There also humility is a huge factor in admitting when you're wrong and when you can learn from someone. So I've talked a bit now, but here are some of our virtual best practices. Like I mentioned before, be authentic. This is extra important in the virtual setting. I find you almost have to be a bit animated because youth aren't always going to want to turn on their camera, and it's harder to reach someone and read their body language when you're in a virtual space. This is 100%, I should have put this at the top, to remind youth why their voice is important and how it will be used. Youth will not want to participate if their voice is going in the trash can. Like, why would we waste their time? They have other things to do. I like to keep meetings less than an hour, especially online. Sitting for that long is really hard. And once again, youth are busy people. So send reminders. I think everybody needs reminders, but sending frequent reminders to remind youth when they're meeting and why it's important and what value they bring to the table. And also sending preparation material in advance and being able to answer questions as they come in. So if you're providing youth with the necessary materials they need ahead of time, you'll be able to have a more meaningful conversation. And honestly, we find that most of the time the youth do their own background research before they show up, but it's good precaution to take to make sure everyone's on the same page. And you should always set up a debrief or next step plans so youth know their voices matter. They want to know what their voices are going into. So for the SDGs, the youth knew that their voices were going to be included in a report afterwards. So in-person best practices are a little bit different, and I'm not sure if people joining us today are more national scale organizations or community grassroots or a little bit of both. But in person, I think youth-friendly spaces is super important. And when we do youth-friendly spaces, I personally like to use the analogy of like a bunch of youth sitting around the boardroom is not a very welcoming space. So some ways, if you are constricted to a boardroom and can't go outside because it's winter in Canada, no one wants to sit outside when it's -20, you can buy these like mats from the dollar store now. They're really cool. And then everybody can color on them at the same time. So it gives them an opportunity to share themselves creatively or like do something if they're feeling a little bit anxious. Play-Doh, that also works. Just creating the space to be a little bit comfier. Transportation is a massive barrier and it does come with a cost. Not every community has public transportation. If it does, try to make your meeting on a bus route. And if it doesn't, I know there's some barriers, but I sometimes drive youth. I have permission from their parents. If that's possible, you can always do that or arrange for just somewhere that's close to their home. Food, especially, I'm going to emphasize this. If you are doing a meeting at night during dinner hour, you should really provide food because youth are going to be hungry, and hungry youth are not happy youth. So I don't think anyone's happy when they're hungry. So make sure you're providing food that is inclusive of everyone's dietary restrictions and cultural needs. Incorporate icebreakers. This helps build authentic relationships. Casual dress code. There's really no reason why youth need to be wearing like a suit to a meeting. They can wear a suit if they want, but just letting them know how they show up is okay. And if you are doing something like a little fancier, like going to the House of Commons for a presentation and there is a dress code there, connecting them with the resources necessary to get professional clothing. So I know Dress for Success, at least for people who identify as women, is a really good resource. And I'm not sure if similar organizations for young men, but those are barriers you have to consider because most young people won't have professional clothes in their wardrobe. And reimburse youth on par with as you would with adult subject matter experts. So when we bring youth to Ottawa per se for a couple days, we actually do provide them with like a prepaid expensive card so they can go and get anything they might need. And this, really, like, some youth don't have jobs, or like they're out of town. So what if they forgot their feminine hygiene products? There's so many different incidentals. And as adult, we get incidentals. So why shouldn't youth get the same? Now I'm going to pass it over to Rachel to talk about how to be a good adult ally.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Hannah, because we know it's so critical to give all this effort and thought into how you're going to structure engagement with youth so that they can contribute to the effort that you're putting forward on your SDG advocacy. We also recognize, and what I can share from my academic work, is that a critical element in making these engagements successful is the presence of an adult ally or a champion, someone who's going to bridge the gap. Because really, this is the point that we know every voice has the right to be heard about the SDG process. That's why we're all here at this conference. That's why we're all sharing and learning from each other. How do we build the momentum and impact change in the best ways possible? Any marginalized voice needs advocates to help take part in these processes. And youth are absolutely disenfranchised citizens. As we mentioned, in other conversations today, Vote 16 is an effort to try to help lower the voting age in our country, because really youth are the only citizens left who are taxed without representation. If they have a job, if they have deductions, they're having tax dollars collected and don't have political representation to voice how they want their dollars spent. So being able to be an adult ally and create these opportunities for youth to come into this political and federal level work is really important, especially even at the local level, being able to access the decision makers. Because these adult allies, yourself as champions, folks like us, we can critically make the space for children and youth. I have lost track in my career how many times I have looked around a large consultation and hit the pause button right off the start, and said, I'm really cognizant of how many adults are in the room, and we're talking about something that's going to impact children and youth, and they're not here. And we would never, as social justice advocates, say, sit around a room with an agenda about changing things for Indigenous women about their reproductive health without having Indigenous women of reproductive health age in the room. And yet we do it about youth and children all the time. The impact of the SDGs, where our country is going, our environmental future, it is their future, it is their lives. And so to have conversations about SDG advancement without them is very disingenuous. So we, as the adult allies and the champions, and that's why we're so thrilled you're all here to talk with us today, is because we can make space for these citizens in this work. And we know it works when we can get the adults who are doing the listening to feel comfortable. So just as Hannah talked to you about all the prep work to go in to make the youth feel comfortable, as the adult ally, the bridge builder between the two, the same effort has to go in to make the adult feel comfortable. So, for example, I've pulled the picture back up here of our consultation with the minister, and you see down in the very far right, it's me. Because that was my role in that consultation. It wasn't my voice that was going to be heard, but I was making sure in advance, during, and after that the minister had what she needed to be able to be ready to hear what the youth had to say. So even things like the time of day, it was during a time of day where the minister had to pause and do a live vote. So we made that accommodation and said, absolutely, we'll stop. She can put up her phone, do the face recognition, do a live vote, and continue with the meeting. Working with her staff of, where's the location? Is this a virtual meeting? Where will all the youth be at the same time? What's on the agenda? How are we going to run the round table? what prep materials matter to everyone. You know, as Hannah said, it was important for the youth in this situation to get materials in advance. We shared with them a few web links to pick out their SDGs to talk about, but the minister also needed to know, you know, what was coming basically at her in this meeting, so that we can normalize this way of learning, to say, you know, these are unconventional subject matter experts, but let's all feel comfortable and create a space where adults can learn from an unconventional teacher. A really important part too, I mean, as adults, and especially adults who hold positions of power and have authority and have alphabet soup after their name and credentials, we also want to be heard, you know, just like that very eager, keen child in kindergarten who goes, teacher, teacher, pick me, I'm ever so smart. As adults, we can have the same feeling, right? We have a lot to share on these topics. We care passionately about the issues that we're advocating for and working on. So it's really important to make it an equal sharing ground, and giving the adult a time to reflect on what they're learning, to echo back, and massive credibility to the minister in this consultation. She mirrored back the sentiments and the thoughts of all the youth with such eloquence that it reinforced for them that they'd been heard. And for her to share with them, exactly as Hannah said, that important part about where their voices are going next, that it is a report her staff are writing, that it is going to be presented at the UN, that their voices will be walked into New York on her back. Like, that is an amazing, empowering experience that these youth know that they have contributed to the federal work of our country. So with that, you know, we kept close to our commitment of trying to only talk for about a half hour, but we really did want to pause and hear from all of you if you have questions. And yeah, Hannah, if you want to leave the next slide up too, that folks have for the next few minutes while we see if there's questions.
Sure.
Our next slide just has ways that you can stay in contact with us. By all means, email. We're adults. We all like email. We're also on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. So you can follow our social media and see what other consultations and SDG work youth who are working with us are engaged in. But really, I want to pause and stop there and open up the floor for anyone to turn their mic or their mic and camera on and share questions, share thoughts, share what you're doing for youth engagement. If you have a best practice that's worked for you or you're in the midst of doing, by all means, we're not the only subject matter experts here. So the floor is open.
I have a question.
Sure.
Here I am. Hi, my name is Helen Leone, and I'm a sessional instructor at the University of British Columbia. And I'm also the founder of the Canadian Offshore School of British Columbia, the Canadian Bilingual School of Paris, France. And we are in the and I work very much in trying to integrate and create awareness of the SDGs with my students, not only at the school, but also I teach in the teacher education program at UBC. And I've been doing a project, a research, my own personal research, and I'll actually be speaking at it at a conference in Glasgow next week about the implementation of the SDGs in schools and how do we get there. And I was quite part of my research was in gathering, doing surveys amongst my teacher candidates and in-service teachers. And I was actually quite shocked at how few people had even heard of the SDGs. Mm-hmm. Last night I was teaching a class for the summer semester, and I just did a show of hands, 38 kids in my students and in my class, and only one university student, a teacher candidate at the end of their program raised her hand and said, I've heard of the UN SDGs before.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I've done I've surveyed 150 plus teacher candidates and in-survey teachers, and it's less than 30% of teachers have actually heard of the SDGs before. So our idea of implementing them in the school, I would assume, would start with the teachers at least. I mean, they're the ones that, so I'm just curious, and maybe I'm just thinking out loud as a researcher, as an instructor, as, you know, a K to 12 teacher as well, like, where is the disconnect? I mean, when we're in the network of people that are familiar and are motivated and inspired and committed in transfer in sharing and implementing the SDGs, I find it shocking that so many people have never heard of them. And I'm just trying to I mean, I've been involved with the SDGs since I was a doctoral student at the University of Ottawa in 2010, you know, and it used to be called No Child Left Behind or Education All or whatever. I mean, it's been in my frame of reference as a teacher and educator person for, I don't know, 13 plus years now. And I'm just curious to see what the disconnect is, because when we're in environments like we are today, if there's such a passionate thing for so many people, but then outside of our world or our walls, it's not there. And I'm wondering if anyone has any ideas what's missing, where the disconnect is, how we can maybe fill that gap. I don't know. I apologize. I don't need to talk too much, but I'm right in the middle of a 3-year research project on implementing the SDGs in the schools, and I'm just gathering all this data, and I'm really quite disheartened at how many people have never even heard of them, never mind implementing them.
Well, Helena, I can respond to you on a few fronts. You're not alone. Your finding is not alone. You know, working in this sector for 2.5 decades, I often go back to the word realization, right? Because we are the champions. We are the ones who know the jargon. And we need to often pause, because the general public, of which your grad students, your teaching graduates are coming up as general population members, are not aware of these things. They're really not. So I always go back to every campaign, every effort, every educational strategy has to involve at the beginning the effort towards creating the moment of realization. Because if we come out the gate with that expectation that what you're describing as the disconnect is there and it's so disheartening, you're expecting the connection to be made. And I think as advocates in this sector, we have to realize as a country, we are still disconnected. We don't know children have human rights. We don't know we're committed to SDG outcomes. We don't even know what they are. So we have to start all of our effort with trying to tether that together. So I'll validate you in saying you're not alone. It's definitely an issue of every strategy. And I'll leave you with a nugget for your research. I don't know if you've yet looked at the work of MMUN. It's the Model Montessori United Nations. They're one of the only education factions that have special status at the UN as council members. And they have phenomenal resources and curriculum on teaching the SDGs in school at the junior high and secondary level. Oh, I think you're still muted, Helena, sorry.
Are they the ones in Italy? The ones that are, their base is in Italy?
No, they're US based.
Okay, and it's called, I'm sorry, if could you just...
it's MMUN is their acronym. It's the Model Montessori United Nations.
Okay.
And so if you get connected with their folks and say you're just curious about their SDG curriculums, they'll be your new best friends.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for taking my question. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I think we have a few more, maybe a moment more if someone had a burning thought or a question before the tech folks need to reallocate our link to the next session. Hannah and I will stay on. All right, well, we will stay on another few moments. I think just in the chat, in case anybody missed it, there is also some resources here from Nicole. Thank you so much. Learning for a Sustainable Future link is there. It's a great connection for K to 12, not for profit out of York. And York has the classroom toolkit. That's a good one too. That is really a good one. So yeah, grab those links before you leave the room from Nicole. Very much appreciated. And as I mentioned, Hannah and I will stay in the room while folks go. Oh, Leslie, we'll go over to you.
I have a quick question, and it's fairly specific, but I'm a city councillor in Nelson, British Columbia, so a small mountain town. We recently formed the committee of 12 that will work for the next 18 months on our official community plan. And there was a real emphasis on trying to bring in at least 1 or 2 youth members. And we got 0 applications. So I don't know exactly the communication tools that the communications team used to reach out to youth, but is there anything that you would recommend that would allow us to cast that net into the right environment? Because the official community plan, it is all about the future. It is all about the community we want to build. And without youth voices, I agree with you 100%. We're creating something for a demographic that I don't want to be talking about it without them.
Well, and Leslie, first, thank you so much for your commendable efforts to want to include youth in your governance composition. That's the first step, right? As adults, recognizing that youth need to be in those decision-making rooms. Thank you for that. So yeah, to your very specific question, which is the $1 million question every time anyone does youth engagement, is how do we get them? Right? So evaluating the communication strategies that went out, it's always about, are you meeting them where they are? So are you getting it on social media? Are you getting it on social media platforms that youth use, like TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat? Are you getting it in school newsletters that are going home to parents? Because the other thing to do is find the adults who talk to the youth, right? Who are the trusted adult allies. So if you can get it to like grade 10 civics teachers, or grade 12 law teachers. If you can get it to your local Boys and Girls Club, your Girl Scout leaders, as Hannah is one herself, right? You know, find where are the other adults who have access to youth, who care about the issues you want to come in and hear from them about. And look at your communication strategies to get to those adults with the ask of having them engage youth. So you can do all the direct youth engagement you want yourself to try to get the message to them. But if you're a new entity, especially, you know, you may not have credibility yet. They may not know who you are yet. They don't know what you're about yet. And I mean, I worked in one youth organization. We started things out, and I looked around the room and I reminded all the adults, I said, you know, it's going to be 2 years before youth pick up the phone and actually call us. And they all thought I had 3 heads. I'm like, no, it's going to take 2 years. For us to have like local community credibility. So if you can't wait that long and you can't develop it that long, no, get the adults who can get you to the youth, you know, and guidance counselors, as I said, civics teachers, sports coaches, bulletins up in arenas, you know, where are the youth? Is there a skate park going on with activities on Saturday afternoons and things? So yeah, find out where they are and get to the adults who can get to them there.
I got a list. Thank you. I'll find
You're welcome. Yeah, it's always fun to make a strategy. And I know, Hannah, you're mindful for us. You're watching the clock. I think we're going to have to give up our link soon. But yeah, Hannah's given us the reminder there in the chat. If you want to continue the conversations, by all means, email us. Follow our social media for the organization. Reach out at any time. And we'd be happy to help you with your youth engagement ideas and have us all work on the SDGs together. That's the only way we're going to advance things. So again, thank you everyone for your interest in involving youth in your work. Thank you for being champions and very much appreciate you joining us today.